but I want to tell you a story or two. It was July 3rd, and the House had passed out the one big beautiful bill. We're supposed to call it the Working Families Tax Cut Act now. A week before, the Senate had dickered on it a little bit, as I suppose the legislative bodies do, and it had come back. And there was a group of holdouts, Republican holdouts in the House, that were unsure about whether or not this bill was good enough for passage. So here we are on July 3rd at the White House. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, myself, a couple of other supporters of the bill, and 5 holdouts. And we're sitting in the cabinet room. And politicians being as politicians are, we kind of fought about everything. When the president said, you know, this bill cuts $1.7 trillion worth of mandatory spending, more than has ever been cut before. People wanted to argue about that. When the president said, this gives us the resources we need to secure the border. Of course, everybody fought about that. And the tension was getting a little high in the room, and it sort of felt like maybe we were drifting further apart. We were just kind of litigating every point. Then at some point, the president said, this bill defunds Planned Parenthood. Nobody argued about that. Because everybody in that room, in that moment of silence, knew that this is not a typical public policy debate. This is not a moment where you fight about cutting $2 trillion versus $1.5 trillion and maybe end up in the middle. This is not about arguing about whether or not the number should be 3% or 4%. This is about looking at an organization that is evil and saying no more. And with that kind of moral clarity, the rest of the meeting we talked about a lot of things. It wasn't just about babies. But the tenor in the meeting materially changed at that moment. There's a lot that we have been able to celebrate in the last couple of years, those of us who honor the sacredness of life. But I got to tell you, sitting in the cabinet room and then later that day in the Oval Office for a similar conversation, to have a president who's in the moment when we're talking about the most important policy issues facing the country is willing to say unequivocally that defunding Planned Parenthood is one of them. That is a blessing for this nation. Thank you, Donald Trump. And of course, we got the votes. Later that night and the next day on July 4th, there Donald Trump, with his signature, did many things, but defunding Planned Parenthood was a big one. And it has been, you just think about all these seeds you plant for 40 or 50 years. You can go years, I mean, sometimes decades, wondering, are we making any real progress? Will the promised land ever arrive? This is not my first or second or third or fifth or 10th Right to Life convention. And then all of a sudden, all of those seeds that were so carefully planted and watered and nurtured, they all seem to be bearing fruit. And so what does that mean for us all now? And I know I'm maybe literally preaching to the choir here, but we need to keep telling our story. Because there are, of course, listen, gee, what an unbelievable success. But one of the reasons that I was willing to tell my family's personal story about how we know that a child in the womb is a child and not a collection of cells. What gave me the courage to write out that story and mail that letter to 75,000 South Dakotans that I thought were undecided on G was because of this convention that over the years had taught me at workshops, how do we use a logic train to knock back the evil arguments of the abortionists? And we need to keep telling that story because there is a lot that government can do There's a lot government has done, but the messages that we've heard today on abortion and foster care, the messages we've heard, Dan and Valerie, how long have I known them and how long have we all known them and their incredible work for this mission? But there are abortion pills out there. And if we make the pills go away, there are still going to be lost and scared little girls who, because they get bad advice or because they don't know where else to turn, are going to want to end that pregnancy. There are still souls to be touched. There are still minds to be changed. There are still babies to be saved. And ultimately, while there will always be a role for government there, government will never be able to crowd out the fact that that work is ultimately done by real humans who understand the sacredness of life. And so I'm just going to close by saying this. Thank you to all of you who planted and nurtured those seeds. There is decades of work yet to be done. And I hope you know that you will always have Dusty Johnson in that garden of righteousness working with you. Thank you.